Hey there, Titans, and welcome back to another Titan Academy video. Today we'll be talking about the different triggers that you can use to trigger your get integrations with Salesforce. First, I'll show you how to trigger your get using an onload action. Next, we'll show you how to do this with an auto trigger. And finally, we'll show you how to trigger your get using a user action. Let's get started. So I have a basic form here, and imagine that I want to populate this form with data from Salesforce. Now, in order to do this, of course, we set up a get. So let's go ahead and do that. And in this case, I want to bring data from a contact. And we'll get back to the trigger in a moment. For now, let's head over to mapping and we'll map our fields. So let's map our first name, our last name, and our email. Now, the first thing that we are going to try is the onload action. And what will happen here is, as it sounds, the get will simply run on load as soon as the project loads. So let's take a look at how this works. Let's set up our condition. Let's say we want to bring the contact whose email equals, and I'm just going to put a static email here just for our example. It equals yarono@formtitan.com. I think we should have a contact with that email. And let's take a look what will happen here. When I preview this, notice that automatically that data is being populated, and that's because my get is running right away, and that is populating my form. Now, there are some downsides to using the onload action. And by the way, we can see what type of get we have based on the color scheme over here. So we can see that it's blue, and that's how we know this is an onload get. Now, the problem with onload is, in this case, we used a static value, and so that made our get work perfectly. But if we were to try to use some data from the projects, for instance, the onload get would render before any of the data on the project rendered, and the get might not work because of that. So we want to be careful when using onload to really only use this when we already know some kind of static ID or static condition that helps us know exactly which record we want to pull. The next one that we want to take a look at is auto trigger. And for this one, I'm actually going to unmap the email here. And we're going to leave the condition to be that the email field is equal to the email field on our form. And what will happen here is, as soon as we put a value in the email field in our form, as soon as this condition is met, it will run the get. So let's take a look and try that out. So as you can see, nothing is populated yet. As soon as I put in an email and focus out, it will already run my get as an auto trigger. And this can be handy and a quick way to run your gets, but it has its risks. It automatically triggers the get even if you don't necessarily want to trigger the get. For example, if I just make a small correction here and focus out, it's going to trigger the get one more time. And another thing to keep in mind is that if we had a more complex condition, this auto trigger might not work out, meaning if we had a condition involving many fields from our project instead of just one, then the get would be more problematic, and then we would not want to use an auto trigger. Now, 90% of the time, or the overwhelming majority of the time, we're going to want to use something called user action. That is the safest and best way to set up your gets. And in order to do that, we'll of course change here to user action, and we'll keep the condition as it is. And notice what would happen if I tried to now run this get. I'm going to put in my email again. And you'll see that the get will not run, and that's because we have not actually set up an action to trigger this get. So what user action means is that we need to create some kind of action that will trigger our get. Now, that action can be many things, and I'll give you some examples. One example is a button. And let's call this button search. And this can be my action that triggers my get. So as soon as I have my get on user action, because it's in user action, it will actually appear in this dropdown. If I didn't have it under user action, it would not appear here. So I'm able to run this get, and I could say get contact details. And now, if I put in my email here, click search, then it's going to get the data from Salesforce. Now, another way to trigger this is with a condition. I can put a condition, let's say on my email field, for example, and we always want to put our conditions on whatever is triggering our process. So I'm going to put my condition here, and I'm going to write if my email field is not empty. And I'll make this an even better condition by saying also if it's changed, because I only want this to run when the value is actually changed. Then I want to run my get. Again, this only appears here because it's under user action. If it was on onload or auto trigger, then we would not see it in that dropdown over there. And now, instead of having to push this button, I can simply write in my email here, click out, and as you can see, that get ran. Now, I'll show you one more way that we can trigger this using a user action, and this is probably the best way to do this. If you're looking to run your get onload, I suggest doing it this way instead of running it on load, just using user action, heading over to your page actions, and then either using first time or every time, depending on your use case, you can just add your Salesforce action here, and that's going to go ahead and trigger the get basically on load, but it'll actually wait for certain things to populate. Now, because it ran on load and I hadn't yet put in my email field, of course, it brought me a random contact that didn't have an email, but you get the idea. This will run it on load and it'll actually wait to relate to other fields or maybe parameters that you might have on your project. So this is a safer way to run the get on load, would be to use a user action and putting it on the page action. So again, we have the three options of on load, of auto trigger, and really the best option, which is user action, gives you the most flexibility. Highly recommend using that option, but you have all three options available to you. And that's how it's done.